Hey everyone, my name is Steve, and you're listening to the very first installment of the Producer Hive Podcast. In episode 1, I had a chat with Martins Popelis, the co-founder and chief commercial officer of the innovative company Sonarworks. Now, Sonarworks is an integral part of thousands of music studios worldwide, and their products promise to bridge the gap between musicians and listeners. And since their inception in 2012, they've made significant headway. As it stands, they are sitting on a total of 4 patents, with over 70,000 recording studios relying on their technology, and 40 Grammy-awarded engineers endorsing their tech. So in this podcast, I had the opportunity to dive deep into the inner workings of their correction factor software Reference 4. We also had an in-depth discussion about room acoustics, mixing with headphones, and much more. So you'll learn about acoustic treatments, hacks to improve your mixes, and whether or not correction factors are the missing piece in your studio's signal flow puzzle. We also have 3 licenses for Sonarworks software to give away, so head to producerhive.com/giveaway for more information. So get ready, and we hope you enjoy the very first installment of the Producer Hive Podcast. Hello everyone, and welcome. This is the Producer Hive Podcast, and I'm Steven Taddei. Thank you for tuning in. Today we are going to be talking about optimizing acoustics in your home studio space. What are some really easy things you can do on a really small budget? What are some things you might have heard about before or read online that could actually hinder your room acoustics? We'll talk about some common mistakes, and then at the end we'll go over correction factor software such as Sonarworks Reference 4. So joining us today to talk about all of this and lend his tremendous insights is Martins Popelis, and he is the co-founder and chief product officer of Sonarworks Reference 4. So Martins, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Steven. Hello, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks for having me.
So can you tell us, before we get too deep into all the fun acoustic side of stuff, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got where you are? What is the Martins story?
Sure. So I'm Martins. I'm co-founder and currently CPO at Sonarworks, meaning I take care of all of our product vision and product development efforts across all the product lines that we are carrying. So basically, here at Sonarworks, my main duty is to carefully listen to the market together with our team here and try to figure out what the market, what people out there really want, and try to solve that in a really elegant way, while hopefully also solving some fundamental problems in the audio world. So that's pretty much what I do. How I got here is it's an interesting story. Actually, on one hand, I don't really come from a studio or audio engineering background, although audio has always been my passion. I think the first money that I've ever earned myself, I spent on a stereo system, and at some point in my kind of late childhood, I guess, I've been kind of trying to build an equalizer out of Radio Shack parts, and I've tried to kind of program an equalizer into a very early computer that I had. But I've kind of had this drag for the audio world in my life. I don't really know where it came from, but then I was off in other businesses. I've been an entrepreneur for most of my professional life, and I've had several companies before Sonarworks that I've co-founded and managed. But then at some point, when I was ready for my next adventure, and 2 other of Sonarworks co-founders, we kind of met together, and there was this early prototype of Sonarworks software that we thought is exciting, and got on this journey. So here we are.
Great. And we'll definitely get into Sonarworks and what that has to offer. But you had mentioned the beginning of it with just like production. So when we talk about music production, engineering, this concept of transparency and translation really comes up. And I know that is a lot of what's behind Sonarworks. So taking it really back to the beginning, this all has to do with room acoustics. So what are the most common issues with our rooms, and more specifically with like a home studio environment where many people are working?
Definitely. So let me maybe before we dwell into answering your question, I would want to kind of unpack this concept of translation a little bit, because I think it helps really answering that question. So I think at the very core of that problem of translation, I mean, what it is that you make a mix, you create some music in your studio, right? And then you kind of like it and it feels great and you love the track, but then you decide to listen to it outside your studio and all of a sudden it doesn't sound all that great and it maybe sounds even terrible and you're kind of embarrassed now to go and show it to your friends. So that's the problem of translation. And I think at the very core of this problem lies the fact that speakers together with your room, and it's also true for your headphones, but in the case of speakers, it's speakers and your room working as a combination. They are actually coloring, they're adding some frequency response to what you're hearing. So in a way, they're acting as an invisible EQ that's adding coloration to what you're hearing in the studio. And you're not necessarily fully aware about what that EQ is exactly. It's just there and you have to work through it. So what it does to you is, for one, it messes up the balance of the sound. So it kind of introduces, like, say your room has a lot of bass that's building up. So you're hearing a nice bass sound in your room and you're saying, yeah, this is exactly the type of bass that I would like to hear. But it's actually added by your speakers and your room. So as soon as you leave the room, then you realize that, hey, the bass is not there anymore. Or vice versa. If your room is absorbing bass, then you would be putting a lot of it in your track until you say, hey, okay, this kind of sounds okay. And then as soon as you leave your room, then the bass just explodes in the other system and it's just too much of it. So it messes up your balance and you can't really kind of mix straight. You kind of have to think about, hey, what part of that, what I'm hearing is true and what part of that is added by my speakers. And the other part of the problem is that it not only messes up the balance of your mix, it actually also introduces what is called a masking effect. So basically what it means is that when you have some frequency is really boosted, then your brain is really focusing in on that frequency. And that means that the brain is actually skipping the information that's right next in other frequencies that are not boosted. It's kind of just zooming in all your attention to this boosted frequency because maybe there is some dangerous animal coming to get you, and that's what this loud sound is about, right? So your brain zooms in on that frequency and it misses out these other frequencies so that are right next to this to this kind of boosted one. So, and that leads to you not hearing what is right next to those peaks that are there. And then as soon as you leave the room and the peak is not there anymore, then you might start hearing what's kind of right next to it. And you're saying, oh my God, there is so much kind of mess that you now need to go and clean up. So kind of different nasty things you start hearing them as soon as you leave your room and the kind of frequency response is different. So these are, I think, the main things for how the frequency response coloration of your speakers and the room really mess up your mix, what is known as the translation problem. And now then, when we come back to your original question, which is what are some of the most common problems, then I really want to start with actually saying, I mean, I've seriously now, during the last kind of 5 years or so, I've seen too many studios and I've kind of been measuring them. And I really have to say, kind of, no matter whether it's a home studio or a really high-end professional one, I really haven't seen this perfect room that you go, oh my God, this is the kind of room. I mean, every room has its issues. I mean, home bedroom studios have one set of issues and kind of high-end professional studios have other sets of issues. And then kind of the guys working in the high-end professional studios are quite often really experienced and kind of really used to the room. So they kind of know what the room does by heart. And kind of they have used to work with it. But I mean, as soon as you start measuring it, they really haven't seen this perfect room. Every room has its issues. Now, when you talk about the kind of main issues of home bedroom studios, I mean, the classic stuff is probably what comes to my mind. I mean, the bass often sounds really boomy, kind of the room is building up too much bass because of kind of the standing waves building up. And then kind of often also, if there is no padding on the walls, then kind of the wall reflections tend to mess up the mid-range. But really kind of all rooms can always use some improvement in how they sound.
Yeah, I forgot exactly who said it. There was a quote I remember hearing, and it wasn't that the person didn't like the term like bad room acoustics. It's just whether the room acoustics are appropriate or not. And yeah, I think they're the three main issues, or at least I know three main kind of tests that are often performed in a room would just be basic from like one position. How linear is it? Like you're saying, how well does it translate? Is that from that one position, the room boosting low frequencies? Is there a huge dip at 200 hertz because of some boundary interaction? So that would be the first one that I know I check a lot. The next one would be early reflections. So off of the front wall, the ceiling, the floor, any desk, the side walls, there are going to be really strong specular reflections or just reflections off of those walls. And the issue with that is it then kind of skews your perception if you have, and I know there's a lot tied in this, but if your desk isn't in the center of the room and your desk is like backed into maybe a corner because it's also a bedroom, you're going to be getting a lot more reflections off of one wall versus the other. And then as you were saying, more from like a psychoacoustic standpoint, your brain is then going to start shifting like the phantom center image more and more towards that one side because there's more information over there. And
by the way, if I may add, the interesting thing with early reflections is that it actually, for your brain, the early reflections in your brain are interpreted as increase in the level. So the level might actually not be there for the measurement microphone, but kind of for your brain, these early reflections kind of sum up as increased volume in that frequency. So that's also an interesting aspect.
Yeah, and that's the whole other side of this psychoacoustic element of it, which we're trying to kind of correct for with this, or at least be aware of so that when we're mixing, we understand it. For sure. But the last one then, which you also mentioned, was this element of like bass buildup. So anytime you are in any type of room, there are going to be these really strong resonances that form based on the dimensions of that room. And if it helps to think about it, like if you imagine any instrument, so we could take like an acoustic guitar would be a really easy example, right? The body of the acoustic guitar is basically a resonant chamber. So when you pluck the string, you create a disturbance in the air particles. The body resonates it. So if you have a bigger acoustic guitar body, it's going to have a lower frequency like resonance to it. If it's more like a ukulele, it's going to have a higher frequency resonance. So I know many times in studios that is one of the key elements that is fought. It is stopping these really strong resonances in the low frequencies that, like you said, then will lead to masking out of the higher frequencies and a huge skew in the clarity. So, yeah, I mean, there are lots of issues. I know in my mind, those are generally like the three main ones. What is like, how linear is it from your listening position? What early reflections are you having that, like you said, are skewing your perception of loudness? And then from more of a timing standpoint, the envelope across the spectrum from high to low frequencies, an unbalanced envelope really will skew you as well. So, I mean, and
of course, kind of sometimes the bedrooms kind of tend also to be really have these kind of long decay times, kind of where the room is really ringing, and that's kind of also really then getting in your way because you kind of you don't have the clarity. You're kind of always stuck in hearing what was played like half a second ago or something like that. So.
And most times when we work inside of a home studio, we're dealing with some of the worst possible acoustics from both generated inside that room and then just like sound transmission from in and outside of that room. So like my home studio right here where I'm sitting, it's 15 feet by 15 feet. So it's like almost a worst case scenario where you get that reinforcement of those room modes. So I mean, there's a lot.
And if you happen to work outside from an apartment building, then there's also the neighbor factor.
Oh, for sure, yeah. There's a slew of issues that we're fighting against when we're talking about a home studio, and the transparency, like you said, it just comes down to when you're listening that it's actually accurate, right? So that the decisions you're making with EQ, compression, with balancing, with panning, that it's accurate and it will actually make sense when you listen to different systems. So
Yep. So from our experience, kind of whenever somebody starts kind of working in a better room that's kind of calibrated, then they come back saying, oh my God, my workflow just got so much more efficient. Kind of, I find that as soon as I take mix outside the room, then I don't have to make like 10 cycles back and forth to the car anymore. I actually do one cycle and it's good. I send this material to my supervisors and they say, oh my God, this is kind of so good. What changed? And kind of everything just starts working better, and you can actually focus more of your time and energy onto the creative decisions that you have to put inside your mix, rather than always trying to second guess yourself and think about, hey, was this sound kind of, do I have to compensate for something in this room, or kind of is it just ghosts in my head, and how to make it work.
What are some things then we can do on a tight budget, would you say, to optimize acoustics? So for that home engineer who's maybe using an extra bedroom or even their current bedroom, what are some easy ways to improve those kind of faults of a standard room?
Sure. So again, before I dive into that question, let me maybe kind of take a step back for a kind of bigger perspective of how I think about it. I think there is, I want to mention a thing called diminishing returns on investment, right? So I kind of think that classically, a lot of people out there are thinking about, hey, if I want my room to sound good, then I need to invest as much as I can into the speakers. And then maybe I also need to invest as much as I can into the room. But then you're kind of quickly getting into the world where, hey, but I mean, the speakers kind of, good speakers start from like $10,000 a pair or maybe more. And then kind of, if you want to make a serious room tuning project, then also you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars. And maybe you even need to invite some acoustic engineer to kind of measure your room and work out the project. So you're talking about significant investment, right? And then not everybody has the budget or the kind of, not everybody really kind of wants to go there. But there is this kind of, I think there is this notion of diminishing returns on investment. So I kind of think that it's not necessarily a smart strategy to kind of go max out all your budget on speakers and not think about the room or not think about some other tools that you would need, because at the end of the day, you're actually tuning your speakers and your room as a complete system. So in general, I don't know, kind of my kind of gut feel / rule of a thumb, if you're thinking about somebody on a budget, is that it makes sense to kind of invest your first $1,000, $1,500 maybe in a pair of speakers, kind of in that budget range. Kind of if you're going like $200 speaker pair, then maybe they're kind of not that good. But if you're talking about $1,000 a pair studio speakers, then you're already talking about a decent pair of studio monitors. And then about the same amount of money, like $1,000, $1,500 maybe, makes sense to invest in your room tuning. Like if you're starting in a glass cubicle or something that's kind of definitely not designed to be a studio, then it makes sense to invest like $1,000, $1,500 maybe in your room to install some basic room treatment. That will kind of get you a lot of return on your investment. But from that point on, I would really say that investing into a room calibration solution is something that will get you the biggest return on investment. Kind of, it will add the kind of biggest return on investment for any given room situation that's kind of about as decent as I described before. And what's interesting about a room calibration solution is that it actually kind of like Sonarworks, it actually can help you guide and navigate your further efforts into room tuning and speaker tuning, because you have a consistent method of quickly and easily measuring your room and actually seeing the measurement on a graph on your computer that's kind of consistent between measurements. So you can then actually see, okay, what are the biggest problems in my room? Okay, this frequency here seems boosted, then there is a dip at like 1,000 hertz or whatever, and then you can start working out what that is and how to solve it, and then you can add some improvements in your room and see if it really helped. So that's kind of for a perspective of kind of how I think about it. I've really met some people who have been like, oh my God, I can't really mix in this room because my $4,000 speakers are not that good, so my mixes turn out kind of translating poorly. So I was thinking about selling my speakers and selling some other gear and maybe getting a decent pair of $10,000 speakers. And then kind of we come in, it was actually a friend in LA whom we visited, who was a producer for a band. And he was like, and we kind of did a demo. We went there to do a demo of Sonarworks Reference. So we kind of installed Sonarworks Reference and kind of measured his speakers and gave it to him. And he was like, oh my God, guys, kind of, finally, I think I'm kind of hearing everything right. So you just saved me this effort of kind of upgrading from $4,000 to $10,000 worth of speakers. And actually, it turns out that this $300 worth of software actually kind of did it better than I would ever dream about. So that's kind of how I think about it from the big picture. Now, if we get to back to your question about what are some of the best ways to treat your room, then again, I'm probably not going to surprise you, but if we talk about a generic average room that we don't really know too much about, but we just say that it's a bedroom studio and it hasn't been treated, then usually the kind of first things to do with the room is install these kind of bass traps in the corners that will kind of help you with your bass situation and absorb some of the bass buildup in the room, and then also install some basic kind of absorbers on the walls that will kind of catch some of the reflections that are coming off those walls, and that's probably a good start for the room treatment. From there, I would actually suggest following the measurement, so kind of start measuring the room, seeing what's really going on there, and then take it from there and try to solve the actual problems that you have in your room, not follow some kind of general guidelines that maybe are not what's going on in your room.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point to mention that. Acoustics is generally this kind of long-term process where you are making changes, then you're analyzing the room, and then you're making more changes based on that. Because it will any acoustical change you make in the room, it's going to change it. So it's good to take more measurements for that. Now, when you mention, I think this is something really important too for people just starting off. When you talk about putting absorption like at first reflection points and absorption in the bass or in the corners to help absorb low frequencies, there is a really big difference between the absorbers that are out there. And what absorbers do, they're not just like magically making sound go away, right? So if you're not familiar out there, all absorbers are doing is they're taking that acoustic energy and they're basically converting it into heat. So when sound propagates and little particles in the air vibrating back and forth, they interact with the kind of soft and just cushiony material in absorbers in our shirts and couches, and that then converts those vibrations, that mechanical energy, into friction, and then the friction is dissipated as heat. So that's really all we're doing with whether you buy like $1,000 worth of acoustic treatment that are absorbers. It's still just converting that acoustic energy into heat. So,
but it's really important about kind of which frequencies are you really catching and where exactly are you spacing those absorbers.
Absolutely.
In the room. So that's obvious.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm trying to get at here. I will see a lot of people in like practice spaces. What they do is they get a bunch of cheap carpet and they put that carpet over every single surface in the room. Like I'm talking every single wall, the ceilings, the floor, it's all just covered in this like indoor outdoor carpeting. And right away you do hear a difference because you have absorbed the higher frequencies, and that's where our hearing is most sensitive. So you think like you've done it, like you've improved the room's acoustics. And honestly, I love it because it's almost you've made it worse, because now you've absorbed the high frequencies, you've removed the energy, and you've allowed those low frequency resonances to even jump through even more, and made your even if it's just like a practice space, you've made it sound really boomy now. So there's this relationship between how thick an absorber is and the range at which it will absorb frequencies efficiently. So generally you don't want to stick with something super, super thin, because you will only be absorbing the higher frequencies. And generally that's why when you look into either DIY approaches, which we can get into, or more advanced or kind of professionally purchased absorbers, they will generally be at least 2 inches thick, if not 4 inches thick, and then you actually mount them off the wall a little bit, because the goal is to have them as thick as possible within reason. You don't want to have like a room where 5 feet on every edge is absorption. That would be a bad thing as well. But there's a lot that goes into it. So absolutely. And then like you said, it's about going back and forth and making sure that those adjustments you're making to the room are appropriate.
Absolutely. But again, I mean, if we're talking about kind of home studios, then I guess we also just have to accept early on that it's maybe not going to be the super perfect room, because obviously there are many limitations when you talk about high-end professional studios. Then they have all sorts of fancy tricks they're employing, up to the kind of just hanging the room on a set of springs to kind of isolate it from external vibration and crazy stuff like that. But
that's true. I guess you have to accept defeat up front, but you can still give it a good fight, right?
By the way, kind of talking about this kind of, I think a point that's kind of has been missed in the music creator community until a few years ago, but now is kind of, I see more and more people getting into it, is actually you can mix on headphones, especially if you kind of work on a set of calibrated headphones. Then frequency response wise, you can really quickly and on a really reasonable budget get a monitoring system that will actually give you a full frequency spectrum, and that you will be able to kind of control, and that you will be able to kind of know what you are hearing and what you are not hearing. And all of a sudden you can actually mix in the park or in a hotel room or in whatever your room is, even if it's a glass kind of cubicle. So obviously there are some issues with the headphones that don't work with kind of that speakers do that headphones don't do, but in terms of checking your frequency response, and I think more and more people are actually switching to mixing on headphones first, and kind of the simplicity and the budget that you need to actually work on headphones is just so much more reasonable than kind of setting up a mixing room, wherever, bedroom or professional, that it just makes a lot of sense. And if you think about it, then I think 80% at least, or kind of a lot of content is being consumed on headphones anyway. So kind of the consumption on speakers, I guess, is going down, and consumption on headphones is kind of growing more and more. So it, even from consumption perspective, makes more and more sense to kind of work on headphones, because that's how people are going to listen to your music anyway.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right, Martins. We've been talking a lot now about room acoustics, and we've just been scraping the top of it. But you're right. If you put on a set of headphones, it's a great way to remove the room colorations and the non-linearities from the equation. Now, of course, there are others that are caused by changing pin of resonances and having the location of the driver angled right down your ear canal, but it does right away remove a lot of the need for having that that perfect room that we mentioned, but the mobility of it is absolutely improved too. So that's a great point to make for sure. Getting back to the absorption, I wanted to ask, because I know this is a hot topic as well. There's this battle between the DIY, the do-it-yourself approach, and then the branded approach, because you can buy acoustic treatment and you look online and it will really quickly get into the thousands of dollars. And then you'll also read articles online saying that you can make something comparable for a couple $100. So is there anything you could say about that? Do you have an opinion between the two?
I have an opinion. I don't think it's a very hot opinion, in the sense that I think, as with many things in life, it's just a balance of how much time do you have and how much are you actually interested and willing to go into the kind of DIY path. I mean, there is a gazillion of YouTube videos and a ton of material, more than ever before, online. So sure, you can kind of, it's not a rocket science in the sense that kind of you can absolutely do a great DIY room tuning, but then you have to really be prepared to put in the time and put in the kind of thinking behind it and try to figure out what's going on. Or you can go with the branded solution, which will kind of quicker get to what you want and kind of free up your time to actually go back to making music. But obviously it's going to cost you more. So I guess it's the kind of classic dilemma. If you have the time and the willingness, absolutely go DIY and have fun, especially if you enjoy it, as some people do. So
yeah, we got into it a little bit. What are some hacks, if you want to call it that, for improving or maximizing your listening position in your own room? I think you gave us one of the best ones, which is to wear headphones. But if you are going to use it, if you are going to use a traditional, maybe 2-speaker stereo system, what would you recommend for people starting off with maybe placement and location?
I mean, the very classical things of try to set yourself up in an equilateral triangle between the speakers and where your head is, and try to kind of not put the speakers right next to the wall, especially not in the corners, and try not to put yourself right at the wall, especially not in the corner. So ideally, you're kind of somewhat in the center of the room. The speakers are off the room, you're off the room, and you're in the right kind of in the right spot of the equilateral triangle. But that's obviously not always possible. So then you kind of have to make compromises.
Right. But that makes a big difference. If you start there, if you try and get your listening position equidistant from both walls, if you can, if you have your speakers inside of a mini closet or kind of like a bay window area, try and not do that. Try not to have your speakers in a situation like that. Get yourself centered in the room, and then I think the equilateral triangle is a great way to.
By the way, kind of, I think I have sometimes seen, and something also to think about is that glass surface is actually a very significant reflector of sound, right? So sometimes you actually have a window in your room, and sometimes you actually have a huge monitor somewhere in your room. So again, it's kind of best to try to set up in a symmetrical manner to this glass surface. So if it's a window, then kind of maybe put it kind of right in front of your eyes or right behind you, so that it's kind of symmetrical at least, rather than kind of put it right next to one of your ears and not to the other. Then your kind of left-right balance is going to be significantly distorted. And also sometimes I've seen kind of, I guess it was for a reason in that room setup, but where the guy was working on this huge kind of Macintosh monitor, right? And like a 27 inch or something. But basically it was placed like right next to him, but kind of right next to one of the ears. And then the speakers were in front of him. So kind of that's also kind of a surface that maybe kind of doesn't necessarily register as a room situation, but actually these huge glass surfaces also matter in how sound behaves in your room. And kind of, I mean, obviously you have to have them, but then try to set up in a symmetrical manner and also be kind of conscious about them affecting the sound situation. And maybe if it's a window, then consider a kind of heavy curtain or something that you can pull over the window when you're doing critical listening or stuff like that. So
yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that's a pretty iconic image of, professional studio with the giant console, and then you have the Pro Tools rig right next to it with its own little portable. And I'm sure when you mix, you can move it away, but it's a great point. You're right. It's not something that normally triggers in your mind as here's a reflective surface because the utility of it.
Yep.
So thanks for bringing that up. Do you have any experience with subwoofers and where you would place those in a room? Since we talked about kind of a traditional stereo setup, but if you did have a sub, where you would locate that?
Sure. At the end of the day, with the sub, it's super tricky in the sense that the bass situation really, really depends on the room geometry, and that's kind of super sensitive to it. So I don't think there is a single kind. I mean, the obvious stuff is don't put it in the corner, but kind of because the corner is going to amplify and make kind of bad stuff with the bass sound. So normally people try to put the subwoofer somewhere under their mixing desk or somewhere kind of not in the corner, not in the center, kind of just somewhere. It's also usually a pretty limited amount of places where you can actually put the sub in your room. So you're going to have to play around and see where it best fits. But yeah, absolutely. I kind of think that my expectation is that we'll see more and more subs coming into the studios, and effectively they're kind of quite important to being able to do a good sounding mix.
I think to get back to what you recommended in the beginning, where you have software like Sonarworks, where as you're improving your room's acoustics, you're actually like quantifying what you need to improve. So that would make perfect sense. If you are trying to introduce or looking to introduce a sub into your space, use the treatment software. Use that to actually get a frequency response curve of your room and find where the placement gives you the most linear frequency response.
Absolutely. If you're using a thing like Sonarworks, then absolutely use that to actually tune both your sub settings, like what the crossover frequency is and what the level of the sub itself is relative to the satellites, and also to actually find the best spot in the room, because you can actually measure it and then see kind of when you have a sub in the system, it's a pretty clear cut where the sub is and where the satellites are. So kind of you can do the measurement, see what's going on, and then try moving the sub around, try tweaking the settings, remeasuring it, and see if it improves, and try to find the best spot and the best sub tuning on to match your room situation.
So I think we finally gotten to it. So I would love to talk about Sonarworks. So can you give us, like, what is the story? How did this start? And I know you mentioned that a little bit in the beginning.
So let me then, I think there is an interesting story, hopefully, into how Sonarworks actually works and what is it that we're really trying to achieve. What's the kind of guiding philosophy of how we're thinking about it? So when it comes to music production, then our objective, we talked about it at length now, basically all the speakers together with the rooms really color the sound, and all the headphones that you might hear, whether they're pro oriented models or whether they're consumer oriented models, at the end of the day, if you get into the measurement of the frequency response, then all of them are really different. So we're talking about 10 to 15 decibel spread between different devices, and there is no real consistency between them. They're all over the place because of different reasons, and that really gets in your way when you are creating music. And largely that's coming from the time, it's largely a hardware driven situation where, because of different reasons, sometimes conscious design decisions and sometimes just design constraints when manufacturers are building these speakers and headphones and the rooms, obviously, then that arrives at this random frequency response coloration, and that ends up getting in the way between you making your music and making it heard by other people and enjoyed by other people. So our objective is that, hey, actually in this day and age when we have reusable space rockets and self-driving cars, digital technology can actually do quite a bit to actually solve that essentially analog problem. And effectively, we can now get this frequency response of a room or frequency response of a headphone under control, and you don't really have to learn to work around it anymore. You can actually just embrace the neutral flat sound. At the end of the day, what we're after is we really want to establish a reliable reference sound standard that music creators can use across different rooms, across different users, across different speakers and different headphones, and just know that, hey, when I'm listening to my music being created, then I know that I hear it through a reliable reference sound. And there are a few tricks that we utilize to actually arrive. And I think it seems that we've been fairly successful with delivering the product that actually does this. And there are a few essential things, I think, that enable us to do so. So there we have to separate speakers in the room from the headphones, because the technology is somewhat different, although driving towards the same goal. But for the speakers, the very important aspect to realize is that two aspects. One is that the frequency response in the room is uneven. So if you take a measurement microphone and you measure the frequency response here, measure it a few inches apart, measure it a few more inches apart, then you will see that the frequency response actually is dramatically different in those points. And you can go on and discover that your room is actually a mess in itself if you're trying to measure the frequency response. So the question is now, which one is the one that I'm trying to correct for? And now comes the other aspect, is that as a human being, you actually don't experience this reality as a measurement microphone does. You're actually a different being from the measurement microphone. Measurement microphone does see this single point, right? And can measure what's going on in that single point. But you can't do that as a human being. Your brain is this powerful DSP engine that we're not fully conscious about, but that's basically interpreting all the senses for you all the time. And what it does with sound, it's rather than delivering you this single measurement point experience, it's actually integrating all sorts of frequency responses for you from the area around you and all types of reflections from your body. So what you're hearing as a human being is not the same thing as a measurement microphone sees. It's this kind of average of the frequency response that's going on around you. So for one, what you will see is that Sonarworks speaker measurement measures 37 points around the area where you're sitting. So it's not based on the single point measurement. It's based on a measurement of an area around you. And the other important thing is that we actually locate the microphone with every measurement point that you are taking. And that enables a few very cool things. One is it actually enables this consistency of measurement between different users and between different locations, so that if I would be doing a measurement in my room here and you would be doing your measurement in your room over there, then we would be actually doing pretty much the same thing. So it enables consistency between different users, and it also enables kind of unleashing some kind of algorithmic approach towards kind of what has been measured and how to now calculate this profile that will make sense for yourself as a human being, kind of calculating the smart average from those points, because the software actually sees them in the context. It's not blind about kind of what's going on. It actually understands how these points are spaced one to other and kind of how to calculate that calibration profile from those points. And then what we see as a result is that it's, on one hand, it's a really quick and simple user experience, and we really think that that's important. Like, we're trying to be the Instagram of room tuning rather than the Photoshop of room tuning, if you will. So in the sense that you don't really have to read this thick Bible of a user manual and some background reading to be able to kind of do wonders with your room measurement and acoustics treatment. We really think about our user as somebody who would much rather spend more time on creative creation of music rather than geeking out about kind of doing all sorts of measurements and tweaking the room. So we want to kind of get that question out of the way as quickly as possible. So that really enables this simple user experience, and also it enables this consistency that allows us to say that, hey, actually between different rooms, we're driving everything towards the same reference sound standard. So that's the speaker part. And then if we go into the headphone part, then again, there we can do a lot more. The user doesn't have to get involved in the measurement. We can measure the headphones in our lab. But again, a question often pops up. So what is the headphone calibration target, right? So kind of what is the target curve that you want to calibrate the headphones towards? And in Sonarworks' case, we are tuning the headphones so that frequency response-wise, they actually sound as a good pair of speakers in a well-tuned, calibrated room. So we're kind of building this ecosystem of reference sound where no matter which supported headphones you're using, or no matter in which room you have your Sonarworks calibrated speakers in, it's actually all of these systems are converging towards the same reliable reference sound that you can hear and that you can talk about over distance, and you can know when you're going into another room or buying a new pair of headphones. So then that's kind of the product philosophy that we're after. And judging by feedback that we're hearing from the market, it seems that people like it.
I like that example of comparing it to like Instagram versus Photoshop. It was something I noticed right off the bat when I first started using Sonarworks, probably around a year ago at this point. It's really easy to use, and it's almost like fun going through the process of calibrating it. It's like just educational enough where I think if you're not familiar with like anything we've been talking about, it can definitely kind of trigger that and get things started for you. But it's definitely not as exhaustive, or doesn't require the like startup like education that something like Room EQ Wizard would require to use. So it's great in that sense. With the headphones, and I know you can either choose to, you have a very exhaustive list of common headphones in like your library, and you can just select the headphone on there. But you can also even send in your headphones like to Sonarworks, and then you'll calibrate like my specific headphones. Like if I wanted to do that for my Bear Dynamics here.
Exactly. Yeah. So what's going on with headphones is that we have these two modes of calibration, where one is what we call the average profiling, which basically means that we take a number of pairs of that particular model, and then we kind of measure them and calculate an average of the profile. And then depending on the manufacturer and the headphone model, there will be more or less fluctuation, but usually it's like within a 3 dB range where this kind of average profile lies from the real profile. So it's already doing like 80% of the job, but sometimes your particular pair will not be exactly as that calibration profile. And then we also do individual calibration, which means that we take a specific pair of headphones, we put a small sticker on it with a number, and then we attach a calibration profile to that particular number. And there, as you said, you can either send in your pair of headphones if you really like them and you're kind of planning on using them for years to come, or you can actually get a new pair of headphones from us with the individual calibration. We don't overcharge for the headphones, but we add a little extra for the service of calibrating them, and then you can get brand new headphones with the individual calibration.
So obviously you are a proponent of calibrating headphones, and you've already given us a lot of good information about why that is the case. So what would you maybe tell someone who is on the fence about that?
I mean, the ultimate test is the ultimate test, and the ultimate answer is, does it work for you? The thing that many users are observing is that as soon as they start using this calibrated headphones or calibrated speakers, then they say, oh my God, kind of my mixes just got better. I can focus more on my productivity and kind of on my creativity, and kind of it just translates faster. Everything got better. I like it. So that's ultimately the test. If you try working on a pair of calibrated headphones and it doesn't work for you, I mean, I've met people who are like, where we go to like really kind of some multi-Grammy award winning engineers who worked like 20, 30 years in that particular room. And then we go in with our demo and we do a calibration of the room. And he says like, okay, yes, that's very good. I kind of see what you're doing. I see how that could help anybody. But guys, I mean, I've been working in this room for 30 years. I know exactly what this room is doing. Kind of, I'm used to it. I know it day in and day out. I'm winning Grammys. I'm kind of okay. I see how this could help some new guys. So I don't really have anything against that approach. I mean, if somebody knows that room, that is the only place where you work, and that's it, then that's very good, I guess. So there's nothing really, nothing bad about it. Many people find that it really improves their workflows for different reasons and for different things. And that is the ultimate test. I mean, on a technical level, I don't really believe there is something that kind of calibration is doing that's kind of awful to the core and kind of destroying some kind of fundamental principles of how sound works. I kind of think that it's doing what it's promising to do, in the sense that it's kind of affecting and changing the frequency response towards what we think is the right neutral reference sound, and doing it consistently across different situations and devices. Whether it works for someone or it doesn't, it's an individual question, but whether it's kind of destroying something fundamental to the audio that kind of cannot be undone, and that's kind of then forever lost, I don't subscribe to that opinion. We've really been testing the filters in and out, and I know they're kind of clean and transparent, and I kind of see a lot of time being spent on dealing with this problem of translation. I would say, like, if you think about music creation at large, I would say at least like a fifth, maybe even a fourth of time at large is being spent chasing the problem of translation, starting from learning how to kind of work in a colored room, kind of sending mixes over and kind of discussing whether mixing engineer did something bad, or whether kind of that bass really needs to go higher, or who's listening on what, etc. All that kind of lost in translation and communication stuff. So a lot of effort is going into that. And I kind of see that in this day and age, we can really fundamentally kind of be done with the problem of translation. Like, in this day of digital technology, kind of that problem, it had to be there in the 60s and the 70s and 80s and 90s probably. Nowadays, we can actually be done. Now it's just a matter of kind of people getting on board with this stuff. So I kind of see, once enough people are on board with using room calibration and headphone calibration, I mean, you can just not have that question about whether you're hearing something right when you're discussing music over distance ever again, and just focus on discussing creativity. So we can just kind of at scale make this translation problem go away. And that's kind of something that I hope will help facilitate in this world. But
yeah, it'd be like the future generation of engineers won't know what the dreaded car test is, because they will have already done it in their studio.
I really hope that's true.
I have a loaded question for you. It was something I did not want to forget about, but I know it's something I ran into when I first started off. And we've talked about calibration, and something we didn't specifically mention is the importance of a calibration, a specific reference calibration microphone. So I think it's important for people to know, and I guess this isn't really a question. You can't just take like a Shure SM57, stick it in your room and use that as a calibration microphone. It's not the same. Those microphones, for listeners like who don't know, they have colorations as well, and that's why we use all these different mics. So it is really imperative for you to have a microphone that is specific for calibration. And Sonarworks, they do have one that even comes with its own correction factor, because, like I just said, microphones have their own coloration. So it's something that is worthwhile.
So it's not a question, right?
Right. I guess it's not a question. Yeah. I guess more of it. Maybe it's a soapbox.
Absolutely. So yes, sometimes this question pops up like, hey, can I use my guitar or voice mic to kind of measure the room? And the answer is sorry, no, you cannot. The room calibration is going to only be as accurate as your measurement microphone, because that's essentially how you're learning about what the coloration is. So if the microphone has a random frequency coloration on it, and maybe some other things that the microphone is doing to your sound, then you're unable to get the correct reading of your room. So you have to use a measurement microphone. We're not insisting that you have to use a Sonarworks microphone. We're recommending it. And as you mentioned, it comes with its own calibration profile, so we can really sign off on the accuracy of our measurement microphone. But if you have a very good measurement microphone that you already own, then kind of go ahead and use it. You don't have to get an extra one from us.
We had spoken a couple weeks ago, and you mentioned kind of in like the future beyond a little bit of Sonarworks that you've released this new Sound ID app for mobile devices. And you've actually geared this a little bit more towards the end user, which is a really interesting concept on what you're trying to help in the world of audio engineering and producers, for them to hear, for engineers and producers to hear as transparently as possible, to save them time, to make things more fun for them. So can you explain what this new initiative, what this new Sound ID app is, and what we can look forward to with that?
Sure, I'm happy to. So it's not that we've geared this a little bit towards the end listener. We've geared this full on towards the end listener. But it's coming from the same story of being done with the problem of sound translation. And let me tell you the story of how we got there. So basically, all the story of Sonarworks is in a way a quest to find the ultimate answer to the question about what is the perfect sound, right? And we've come from this kind of data-driven and software technology point of view, but we really wanted, in a way, from day one to get to the bottom of the question. Okay, so now when we have this digital technology that can help us tune sound any way we want, then what do we want, right? So we ended up doing, I think, the biggest research in the consumer preference of sound with like 40-something thousand participants in it.
Wow.
And what we found out is that actually, not maybe too surprising, but now when you look back at it, but basically what we found out is that everybody likes something else. Some people like a mad amount of bass, and some people hate it, and some people really like high treble sounds, and some people hate it, and there are all variations in that. But also our hearing is different, and it changes with age. So for each individual, this kind of answer to the question of perfect sound is actually different than if you take any single fixed frequency response of the sound, then it's going to be the best possible sound for no more than 17% of the participants.
Interesting.
Whereas if you personalize sound using what is now the Sound ID technology in Sound ID app, when you personalize the sound according to the individual using machine learning algorithms and whatnot, then we actually are now, I think we're now over 85% of people who say, hey, yes, I actually like this sound better than whatever was the original sound. In a way, I kind of think that this picture makes sense where kind of you create on a neutral reference sound and then you deliver the sound basically personalized for each of the individually tuned for each of the listeners out there to make sure that they kind of get the best out of the emotional message that you're trying to send. So that's basically now what this Sound ID is about. And at the moment, what you see is the mobile app that just lets you create your personal sound profile and test it a little bit on the mobile app. But pretty soon you will see products that come kind of integrated with this Sound ID feature on the market, where the end listener will be able to kind of enjoy this personalized sound.
I mean, it's something that we've had kind of like just a topic in audio engineering a lot, right? You'll produce a song in like a multi-million-dollar studio, go through months and months of work, and then someone ends up listening to it on a pair of 30-cent earbuds, and it's streamed MP3. So like the quality is of course going from the pinnacle of just the prestige as best as possible, and then you're listening on the worst possible audio system. So thank you for paying some attention to that, the end user and the actual delivery of that audio system. I definitely look forward to trying that out a little bit more. I do have it on my phone, and I've started playing around with like choosing the different sounds that you want to use as like a reference for developing that profile, and it's very, very interesting. Before we wrap things up, we've talked about a lot here. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, I'm personally really thrilled to be on this journey and see that we're actually building some products that people out there are excited about and that seem to be improving their lives and kind of solving some problems that they really have. So I hope we continue on that journey. And if anyone has any type of feedback or kind of some wishes that they think kind of would be good for us to build around, or something that they want us to hear, then we're really kind of trying to do our best to be open and listen to everybody. So if there's anything that you want to say or ask about, then just reach out. It's a small world nowadays.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all your work. Thank you for giving me your time and sharing all that great information with us, chatting about Acoustics, Sonarworks. So Martins, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being on the Producer Hive Podcast.
Well, Steven, thanks for having me again. It's been fun, and I hope your listeners enjoy this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. And for anyone out there, if you want to check them out, just a really quick search online, but it is sonarworks.com, and then it is that Sound ID, and you can get that right from your phone. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you have any questions, let us know, and hope you learned something. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, bye.